Regardless of what you might think about Noam Chomsky, you can't really say that he's a reactionary or a political opportunist. As one of the left's de facto patron saints, I was pleased to hear him push back against some of the hysterical rhetoric we've been hearing about the so-called rise of fascism in the United States. People on the left really listen to Chomsky, so hopefully this can help get us to a point where anti-fasc and similar groups aren't actively promoting the idea that you should assault so-called neo-Nazis on sight. Especially with Trump adopting more centrist positions recently, I think it's going to be harder and harder to justify that kind of behavior. But I wouldn't get my hopes up too much. In 2017, logic doesn't really seem to have a place on the extreme ends of either side of the political divide.
Do you think it's accurate to use the word fascism or talk about the rise of fascism in the United States?
Well, fascism has become a kind of a scare word, but many of the aspects of fascism are not far below the surface. You go back to, say, the 1940s. Robert Brady, great political economist, Veblenite political economist, wrote a book called Business as a System of Power, in which he argued that in all of the state capitalist economies, so-called capitalist economies, really, state capitalist, there were developments towards some of the institutional structures of fascism. He was not thinking of concentration camps and crematoria, just the nature of the institutional structures. And that was not entirely false. Could you move towards what Bertram Gross around 1980 called friendly fascism? So fascist-type structures without the crematoria, which is not a core necessary part of fascism. That could happen. We should recall that through the 1930s, the fascist regimes had a pretty favorable attitudes towards them in the West. And Mussolini was called by Roosevelt that admirable Italian gentleman, who was maybe misled by Hitler. In 1932, one of the main business magazines, I think Forbes, had an article with the headline, front page story. The headline was, "The wops are unwopping themselves." Finally, the Italians are getting their act together under Mussolini. The trains were running on time, that sort of thing. The business community was quite supportive. As late as the late 1930s, the U.S. State Department was, can't actually say supporting Hitler, but saying we ought to tolerate Hitler because he's a moderate standing between the extremes of right and left. We've heard that before. He's destroying the labor movement, which is a good thing. Getting rid of the communists, the socialists, fine. There's right-wing elements, ultranationalist elements at the other extreme. He's kind of controlling them. So we should have a kind of a tolerant attitude toward him. Actually, the most interesting case is George Kennan, great revered diplomat. He was the American consul in Berlin, and as late as the 1941, he was still writing pretty favorable comments about Hitler, saying he shouldn't be too severe. There are some good things there. We associate fascism now with the real horror stories of the Holocaust and so on. But that's not the way fascism was regarded. It was even more strongly supported by the British business community that could do business with them. There was a largely business-run regimes, which there was a lot of support in Germany because of it did create something like full employment through indebtedness and military spending, and was winning victories. Could we move in that direction? It's been recognized. You can read it right now in mainstream journals, asking, will the elements of Gross's friendly fascism be instituted in a country like the United States? And it's not new. Maybe 10 years ago, there was an interesting article in Foreign Affairs, main establishment journal, by Fritz Stern, one of the major German historians of Germany. It was called Descent into Barbarism. And he was discussing the way Germany deteriorated from what was in fact maybe the peak of Western civilization in the 1920s into the utter depths of history 10 years later. And his article was written with an eye on the United States. This was the Bush administration, not today. He was saying, he didn't say we're Bush's Hitler, wasn't saying that, but he was saying there were signs that we should pay attention to. He said, I sometimes have concern for the country that rescued me from fascism. And I see what's happening.
And do you see the Donald Trump's attack on the press as part of that trend toward fascism, him calling the press the enemy of the people?
It's dangerous, but Nixon did the same thing. You remember the Agnew and so on. It's dangerous, but I think it's well short of what we regard as fascism, but it's not to be dismissed. And I think we can easily see how if there had been a charismatic figure in the United States who could mobilize fears, anger, racism, a sense of loss of the future that belongs to us, this country could be in real danger. We're lucky that there never has been an honest, charismatic figure. McCarthy was too much of a thug, you know. Nixon was too crooked. Trump, I think, is too much of a clown. So we've been lucky, but we're not going to be lucky forever necessarily.